In June 1941, as the German Wehrmacht tore across the Soviet border, a 25-year-old history student stood in a sweltering recruitment line in Odessa. She was looking for a rifle. When she finally reached the front, the registrar saw a girl. He reflexively pushed a nurse's application across the desk. She pushed it back, then reached into her pocket and produced her Voroshilov sharpshooter badge, a mark of excellence from her time in a civilian shooting club. It was her receipt for every bullseye she'd ever hit. She was silent, but her demeanor said, "I can shoot. Put me in the infantry." Despite the badge, the bureaucracy was stubborn. She was eventually allowed into the 25th Rifle Division, but instead of getting a weapon, she was handed a shovel. For weeks, one of history's greatest marksmen was relegated to digging trenches and laying communication wire. Because of severe weapon shortages, her only defense was a single RGD-33 grenade tucked into her belt. She was a sniper without a rifle, waiting for a tragedy to give her a chance. She didn't have to wait so long, for on August 8, 1941, near the town of Bilyevka, the chance arrived. A comrade was struck down beside her. As he was being evacuated, he pressed his heavy, soot-covered Mosin-Nagant Model 1891-30 into her hands. It was the most important handoff in the history of the Eastern Front, and exactly what she had been waiting for. The young woman crawled to a vantage point. Through the iron sights, she spotted two Romanian officers, allies of the Germans, standing nearly 400 meters away. To the untrained eye of a novice, they were specks, but she was no novice. Two shots rang out. Two officers fell. In that moment, the history student stopped studying the past and started writing it. She was one of the 2,000 women who would take up the scope for the Red Army. By the time the smoke of war cleared 4 years later, she would be one of only 500 to survive, leaving 309 bodies in her wake. Her name was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and the world was about to call her Lady Death. Lyudmila Belova was born in Bila Tservka, Ukraine, into a world of radical change in 1916. Her father, Mikhail, was a locksmith from Petrograd and a committed Bolshevik who had fought his way through the Russian Civil War as a regimental commissar. He was a decorated hero of the Order of the Red Banner, and his military-style upbringing of Lyudmila instilled in her a rigid sense of duty and discipline. Conversely, her mother Elena came from the old world of Russian nobility. This household was a microcosm of the new Soviet Union, a blend of proud intellectual heritage and unyielding proletarian steel. In 1930, Mikhail Belova got promoted to an executive position, and the family moved to Kyiv. The then 14-year-old Lyudmila didn't fit the mold of a traditional girl of the era. She was known as a tomboy who was fiercely competitive, challenging neighborhood boys in sports and refusing to be outdone. When she heard a neighbor's son boasting about his shooting skills at a local range, she rolled her eyes and joined the Soviet Society for Aviation and Defense. There, she learned to shoot, and she mastered it. She walked away with the Voroshilov sharpshooter badge, with a steady hand and cold nerves that would later define her. At just 16, Lyudmila's life took a sharp turn into adulthood. She married Alexei Pavlichenko and gave birth to a son, Rostislav. But the domestic life of the 1930s couldn't hold her. She wanted more. She wanted an education. She wanted a career. This might have been weird in other parts of the world at the time, but not in the Soviet Union. So Lyudmila's marriage dissolved quickly, leaving her as a single mother in an era that demanded everything from its citizens, in a system that prioritized the state over the individual. It's quite interesting to note that while Lyudmila and Alexei split up, she still kept his last name. By day, she worked as a grinder at the Kyiv arsenal factory, surrounded by the screeching of metal and the smell of industrial oil. By night, she pushed through household chores and attended night school. Her time at the arsenal was very important in shaping her understanding of firearms, and she left with a much better skill set. The management of the Kyiv arsenal recommended her for a position in military engineering school, but she declined. By 1937, she finally reached the halls of Kyiv University. She was there to study, hoping to become a history scholar and teacher. She was a star on the track team, a sprinter, and a pole vaulter, sports that required explosive power and total body control. The Soviet state, however, saw her potential for more than just sports. Even while she studied the Napoleonic Wars and ancient history, the Red Army enrolled her in a military-style sniping school. For 6 months, she balanced her textbooks with ballistics charts, unknowingly preparing for a war that was only 4 years away. Before she could finish her education and receive a bachelor's degree in history, the Germans bombed Kyiv University. The encirclement carried out by the Wehrmacht was brutal. Kyiv was Lyudmila's city, so she took it particularly badly. She had to endure seeing the charred, tortured bodies of her comrades, of girls raped by advancing Nazi soldiers, of babies murdered. Some of these were people she knew personally. It made her sad, then it made her angry, so she applied to be enlisted in the Red Army. In 1941, the Soviet Union wasn't yet ready for female soldiers. Women were being required to go to the factory lines to replace their husbands, but Lyudmila Pavlichenko was one of the rare few who didn't wait to be asked. She didn't want a wrench, however, she wanted a trigger. Initially, she was given a nurse's outfit, but when she provided her sharpshooter badge, she was enlisted as an infantryman. Because she volunteered so early, she was an anomaly. When she was sent to sniper school, there were no all-female units yet. Those wouldn't exist until 1942. She was dropped into a sea of men and a culture of relentless bullying. The officers doubted her, so they set her up to fail. Her final exam was a death trap. To prove she belonged, she was ordered to kill 2 enemy soldiers standing in an open field. For a rookie, this was nearly impossible. In the chaos of World War II, the average soldier needed a dozen bullets to secure a kill. Worse, the moment the first man fell, the second would dive for cover or return fire. Lyudmila took a breath. She hit them, taking them both down with 2 clinical headshots before the second man could even flinch. But the sound gave her away, and the horizon erupted in German fire. She later recounted how she felt in that moment, saying, "I have to admit, I was scared. In my first real baptism of fire, I was in range of hot German fire, calling out to our machine gunners to save me. They did. She survived. She passed. And she was officially a sniper in the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division." The Siege of Odessa, August-October 1941, was a 2-month nightmare, but while others struggled with the morality of killing, Lyudmila didn't. She was filled with rage for what she saw the Germans do in Kyiv. Every time she took a life with her Mosin-Nagant rifle, she carved a notch into its wooden butt. She was successful because she had mastered a terrifying mental shift. She no longer saw the enemy as human. She explained, "Hatred did not come to us all at once. We are a peace-loving people. But we saw with our own eyes what the Hitler beasts could do. Now, we hate the enemy too much to fear him." Lyudmila wasn't totally invincible. She had close brushes with death, one of which was particularly scary. One afternoon, she was perched in a tree, hidden by dense leaves. A German soldier spotted the slight movement of a branch and began peppering the tree with lead. Knowing she was seconds from death, Lyudmila purposely fell. She hit the ground like a sack of stones and went limp. For hours, she lay perfectly still among the fresh corpses of her comrades while the battle raged inches from her face. She stayed in that grave until nightfall, finally crawling back to camp under the cover of darkness. When she walked into the light of the Soviet camp, her comrades turned pale. They thought they were seeing a ghost. That near-death experience made her a scientist of deception. She began adopting distraction tactics that would become legendary, like the scarf trick. She would tie brightly colored scarves to bushes or low branches. The Germans, trained to look for any splash of color or movement, would fire at the cloth, instantly revealing their hidden positions to her waiting scope. One of her favorite deceptive actions was to prop up stuffed uniforms to draw sniper fire, patiently waiting for the enemy to reveal themselves before delivering a single, silent response. By October 1941, Odessa was a lost cause. But Lyudmila Pavlichenko had 187 notches on her rifle, and the world was starting to whisper her name, Lady Death. When the Red Army began a massive maritime evacuation of the city, Lyudmila was among those ferried across the Black Sea to the fortress city of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. The siege of Sevastopol would be one of the bloodiest chapters of the war. For 250 days, the city was pounded by German heavy artillery, including the Schwere Gustav, the largest rifled weapon ever used in combat. In this landscape of pulverized stone and twisted metal, Lyudmila became a predator of the ruins. Here, she began using a 4x PE scope on her Mosin Nagant, so she had to account for the Coriolis effect and windage at 400+ meters. It wasn't easy work, but she did it. While the Soviets called her Lady Death, the Germans began calling her the Russian bitch from hell over their radio frequencies, a sign of their pure, unadulterated fear. It was here that she found a brief, tragic flicker of light. She fell in love with Alexei Kitsenko, a fellow sniper who understood the silence and the strain of her world. They were married in a simple frontline ceremony. For a few months, they were the ultimate lethal pair, patrolling the front lines together. But in Sevastopol, death didn't always come from a bullet you could see. In early 1942, a German mortar strike rained down on their position. Alexei shielded Lyudmila, taking the brunt of the blast. He was mortally wounded and died in a field hospital days later. Lyudmila became even colder. From that moment on, every German she saw was the reason her husband was gone. Her kill count began to skyrocket. As her tally climbed past 200, the German High Command realized they had a crisis. They began sending their own elite marksmen specifically to hunt her down. This led to 36 legendary sniper duels. These duels were psychological battles, different from the fast-paced shootouts against regular infantry units. Lyudmila would crawl into position before dawn and stay there, sometimes for 15 to 20 hours, without moving a muscle. She would even let insects crawl across her face and eyes without blinking, knowing that the slightest twitch would catch the eye of a German scope. Her most famous encounter lasted 3 days. Her opponent was a highly decorated German sniper. On the third day, the German made a fatal mistake. He got impatient. He shifted his weight, and a stray glint of light hit his lens. Lyudmila fired instantly. When she crawled to his body to retrieve his logbook, she found he had killed over 200 men and felt a cold, professional satisfaction that one more beast was off the board. By May 1942, Lyudmila was promoted to lieutenant. By then she had 257 kills, but the cost was showing. She had been wounded 3 times already. In June 1942, the fortunes of war finally caught up with her again. A mortar shell exploded near her nest, spraying shrapnel into her face. The Soviet High Command panicked. Lyudmila was now the face of the Soviet spirit. If she were captured or killed, it would be a devastating blow to national morale. Under direct orders from the Kremlin, she was boarded onto a submarine in the dead of night. As Sevastopol fell into Nazi hands, Lyudmila was whisked away beneath the waves. She had left the front lines for the last time, but her tally stood at a final, terrifying 309. After her extraction from the smoking ruins of Sevastopol, Lyudmila was a woman physically broken by war, but also a symbolical hero. In 1942, a year after the Japanese had flung their challenge into the face of the Americans at Pearl Harbor, the Soviet Union was desperate for the United States and Great Britain to open a second front in Europe to take the pressure off the Red Army. But the general American public wasn't keen on rushing off to war. They still remembered the First World War and its costly lessons. They needed a bit more than just the mere words of a politician. To convince the Americans, Stalin sent a 26-year-old woman with shrapnel scars on her face and 309 notches on her rifle. The Soviets knew they had to get the American men to feel like they were hiding out on the other side of the world while women did their duty, and there was no better way to achieve that than to send a woman who had excelled in a male-dominated field. The idea was to shame the men into going to war, and so Lyudmila became the first Soviet citizen to be received at the White House. When she arrived in Washington, D.C., she met First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The two women couldn't have been more different, one a veteran of the bloody Eastern Front, the other a champion of Western social reform. Despite their starkly different backgrounds, they formed an immediate, deep bond. Eleanor saw the human being behind the Lady Death moniker. She noticed that Lyudmila was exhausted and shell-shocked. Eleanor took her on a tour of the United States, acting as her protector and helping her navigate a culture she didn't understand. The American press, however, was a different story. While Lyudmila wanted to talk about the desperate need for more anti-aircraft guns and a second front, the reporters were obsessed with her femininity. They asked if she used lipstick in the trenches, and why she didn't wear makeup while going out. They criticized her uniform, saying it was too baggy and didn't show off her figure. One reporter even asked if she was allowed to curl her hair during a siege, as if one had time to worry about such frivolities when bombs were falling all over the place. It was obvious that in 1942 the American public was generally ignorant about the situation of things in Europe. Lyudmila's patience, honed over hours in the snow waiting for a target, finally snapped. Through her translator, she told the New York press, "I am amazed at the kind of questions put to me. I wear my uniform with honor. It has the Order of Lenin on it. It has been covered with blood in battle. It is plain to see that with American women, what is important is whether they wear silk underwear under their uniforms. What the uniform stands for, they have yet to learn." The tour reached its climax in Chicago. By then she had gained more confidence and was better prepared to handle the reporters' condescending questions. Standing before a crowd of thousands of American men, Lyudmila stepped to the microphone. She looked out at the audience, thousands of able-bodied men who were not yet at war, and delivered the most famous line of her life. "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The room went dead silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. She had done it. She had shamed the men of the West into realizing that the war was actually a life-and-death struggle being fought by girls from Kyiv. Lyudmila never returned to the front. She spent the rest of the war training hundreds of other snipers, ensuring her Lady Death legacy multiplied. When the war finally ended in 1945, she went back to being a normal person. Lyudmila finished her degree at Kyiv University and became a historian for the Soviet Navy. She went back home, remarried, and lived a more modest and quiet life. Lady Death died in 1974 at the age of 58, her health long compromised by the wounds and the stress of the war. American folk singer Woody Guthrie was so moved by her tour that he wrote the song Miss Pavlichenko, with the lyrics, "300 Nazis fell by your gun." Till this day, no other woman had surpassed her kill count, so she still remains the deadliest female sniper ever. If you enjoyed the story of this wonderful woman, then hit the like button. It helps the algorithm share this with more people, and it also feels very, very good to me. Please subscribe and turn on notifications if you like our channel. You won't want to miss the next one. Who is the most underrated figure in history you want to see us cover next? Drop a name in the comments. We're reading every single one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next chapter.